Hey, I'm Chuck Mingo. Thanks for being with me. This is the first episode of Bridging the Gap. This is a show where I'm going to get to take you places, and we are going to go places you wouldn't normally go on your own. Now, why are we calling it Bridging the Gap? Why am I calling it that? Because that's my life's work. I am passionate about bridging divides. And I really believe that that ties into who Jesus was. There's this place in the Bible that says Jesus came to break down the dividing wall of hostility. Can you think of any dividing walls in our culture right now that you'd like to see broken down? You'd like to see more unity? Well, I'm going to be taking you places and talking to people who are doing that. We're going to talk about the divides that exist in race, and I'm going to take you places where people are bridging that gap. We're going to talk about the places where the divides exist in religion. And I'm going to be taking you some fresh places where we're going to see that divide break down. I'm going to be taking you places where that's happening culturally as well. In all of these episodes, I think there's something for you. So I want to encourage you not just to watch one, but to watch them all. Go on this journey. There's something for you. Let's get started. Are leaders born or made? It's an age-old question. And there's certainly some people who say, no, leaders are born. It's innate. You either have the stuff of leadership or you don't. But then there are other people who say, no, leadership is a calling. And in fact, there are times and moments in history or in your individual life when leadership might be called out of you. We're going to learn more about this whole idea of leadership by looking at the story of when one leader made history. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama. And I'm actually at the spot where on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her seat on a segregated bus. See, you may be familiar with this story. She was a seamstress. It was the end of a day. And the way it worked is the buses were segregated. There were whites-only sections in the beginning of the bus. And as you got further toward the back, that's where the colored-only sections, as they called it back then, that's where they were. And Rosa Parks was in a section that was colored only, but as the bus got more and more crowded, they would move colored people to the back. They would make African Americans give up their seats. And that's what Rosa Parks decided not to do on this fateful day. Now, we hear this story and we can think about it like, wow, what a serendipitous moment. In this moment, she makes history with this split-second decision. But what we're going to learn is actually she prepared for that moment. And learning about her style of leadership and how she influenced the civil rights movement can help us understand our styles of leadership in the places we're called to influence and lead as well. I have to say the story of Rosa Parks has always inspired me. And one of the reasons it inspires me is because she shows that leadership comes in different styles. And I can think of times in my life where I've doubted my leadership because maybe it didn't look like the typical styles that I saw around me. I remember when I was introduced to this term, the Big L leader. And it was a term that was used to describe people who could lead large groups of people, and I often thought, well, to be a Big L leader, you got to be a hard driver. You got to be the person that has the ideas all the time. And for me, I didn't see myself that way. My leadership showed up differently. My leadership showed up more relationally, more collaboratively. And I think about Rosa Parks and I'm inspired to embrace the ways that I am uniquely wired to lead. Who would argue that Rosa Parks was a Big L leader? Think about the repercussions of her decision to sit down on the bus that day. No doubt, there are thousands of people's lives who are impacted by that decision. Her Big L leadership line travels for generations, right? And you can directly point to things like the passing of the Civil Rights Act and the passing of the Voters' Rights Act to what Rosa Parks initiated on the day she made that decision. Her choice to sit that day caused thousands of people to stand up for civil rights, not just then, but in the years to come.
thought I heard Buddy Bolden say, you're nasty, but you're dirty, take it away. Oh, you're terrible, you're awful, take it away. I thought I heard him say, thought I heard Buddy Bolden shout, open up that window, let that bad air out. Open up that window, let that foul air out. Thought I heard Buddy Bolden say. Buddy Bolden say, you're nasty but you're dirty, take it away. Oh, you're terrible, you're awful, take it away. I thought I heard him say, oh, I thought I heard Buddy Bolden shout, open up that window and let that bad air out. Oh, open up that window, let that foul air out. I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say.
You know, the civil rights movement was a study in leadership. You know, when we think about the civil rights movement, we think about the big leaders, right? We think about the leaders who were out front, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy. Those are the kinds of names that come to mind. But the thing I love about the civil rights movement is it was filled with different leaders who led in all kinds of different ways. It was a movement made up of leaders. So I asked you a question earlier, are leaders born or are leaders made? Well, the answer is both. I mean, they're human. So every human is born. And I do believe there's some innate abilities that connect to our leadership. But I also believe that leaders are formed, that they're forged in times like the civil rights movement. So it's a combination of both. And we actually see this in the Bible. So the Apostle Paul was writing a letter to the Roman Christians in Rome, and he was trying to help them understand what the church was. What does it mean to be a part of this thing called the church? And I love his analogy. He says it's like a body. The church is like a body that has different functions and many parts. Those many parts serve different functions. So Paul says that just like the body has different parts that serve different functions, you and I, if we're part of the body of Christ, we have different functions. In fact, he puts it this way in Romans 12:6. He says, we all have different gifts according to the grace given to us. But I love Paul's bottom line. Let's use it. Use those unique gifts. See, if you have God-given gifts, and I believe that you do, you can have a God-given impact when you use them. Take, for instance, Nathaniel Adams Cole, better known to the world as Nat King Cole. Nat King Cole was a performer in the time of segregation, the time when the civil rights movement was happening. And yet his influence on the movement is not about marching. It's not about preaching from the front. It really is about being a trailblazer, being an entertainer who did things and broke new ground, not just for himself, but for artists that would follow. A couple examples come to mind when I think about that. Number one, Nat King Cole broke racist stereotypes and broke against racism in every venue at the time, whether it was on stage, whether it was on radio, whether it was on television, and in fact became a household name in many households where he would not have been able to cross the threshold. I mean, again, remember, this is segregation. So Nat King Cole looked like me. He was a black African-American, and that meant that there were places in the country he was allowed, and there were places he wasn't allowed. There were people who told him, this is your station in life, and these things can't be your station in life. You can be an entertainer, but you can't be an owner, entrepreneur. And yet he broke through all of those stereotypes and became someone who was revered, not just in black households, but in white households all across the country. I also think about a time when because he had the money for it, he moved into an all-white neighborhood in Los Angeles. And not soon after that, the KKK burned a cross on his front yard. A very violent, terroristic way to tell him, this is not the place where you belong. And yet he stood his ground and refused to let those people, those neighbors who wanted him out, he refused to let them win the day. This is a guy who would perform in hotels and then sue the hotels because they wouldn't let him stay in those hotel rooms. I mean, this is a guy who used his platform to have an impact. And because of that, Nat King Cole was a trailblazer. And Nat King Cole, like other entertainers, like other artists, played a significant role in the progression of the civil rights movement. Now, you may not have a platform that's musical. You may not have a platform for millions. I don't, but you have a platform. I have a platform. What is that platform for you? Maybe your platform is the two people that you're leading that are your kids. Maybe your platform is people you mentor. Maybe you're a teacher or you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, or you work in an organization. Maybe that's your platform. Maybe your platform is in a nonprofit organization, or maybe your platform is in your community organization. Wherever your platform is, when you use your God-given gifts, you can have a God-given impact. So I would encourage you to use your platform to lead in the ways that you're uniquely wired to lead.
I heard, but it bored and shout. Open up that window and let that bad air out. Oh, open up that window, let that foul air out.
So this is a replica of the bus where Rosa Parks made her bold decision. You know, if you are Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, you owe a major debt of gratitude. If you've ever voted, you owe a major debt of gratitude to women, and specifically to Black women. You know, this was the place, right? This is the colored only section. It would have been in the back of the bus. She wasn't allowed in the front of the bus. Rosa Parks made a decision that completely blew this out of the water. You know, her leadership style wasn't this like brash, out front, in public face, but she leveraged a moment. You know, think about this. This is, you know, a replica of what a fire hydrant would have looked like in 1955. This is like, you know, the Montgomery Advertiser, and the date is from 1955. All of this has been done to recreate a moment that happened on a specific street, Montgomery and Commerce Street, a moment where everybody who was around, everyone who was on this bus didn't have an idea of what was changing that day. They had no idea that a woman getting arrested on this bus was going to be one of many events that begun to change history. You know, Rosa Parks wasn't the only woman who acted that day. Actually, Joanne Robinson comes to mind. Joanne Robinson was a woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who some 6 years before wanted to boycott the buses, the segregated buses of Montgomery, but got shot down. But she was a part of a women's organization called the Women's Political Council of Montgomery. And she knew that at some point that boycott was going to happen. She actually told the mayor that this boycott's going to happen before it happened. And so what she did was, when Rosa Parks got arrested, Joanne Robinson very quickly organized people, including those women that were part of her council, hundreds of women and other people, to make this boycott a reality. They knew that the moment had come. And so you know what her leadership style included? Joanne Robinson's leadership style included taking physical action to make something change. So she went to a mimeograph machine. Some of you don't even remember what those are, but like they crank out copies. It was before, you know, digital, right? And she cranked out on a handbill 35,000 copies. 35,000 copies that basically said to the Black community in Montgomery, Alabama, we're boycotting the buses. Effective Monday, we're not going to be riding the buses. She got those out to the places they needed to go, and actually wanted to get them out before the preachers could preach on Sunday, because she knew the preachers would probably be conservative and that they may not be ready to leverage the moment. So Joanne Robinson leveraged the moment, galvanized leaders. Her style enabled this bus to become a movement that lasted 381 days. And I think about all the hundreds of people who organized rides for each other, who chose to walk to work, who took risks, who were willing to lose things so that others could gain things. All of those represent the ways that leadership of various styles, various perspectives and backgrounds, all galvanized together to make this moment, this 1955 moment, a moment that echoed into the future, a moment that created voting rights, a moment that created civil rights, a moment where a person like me, when I get on a bus, I don't even think about it. I just sit wherever I want to. Why? Because people leveraged a moment based on their style, based on their opportunity, based on their platforms. Man, there is something really amazing about being in places where history happened. You know, Montgomery, Alabama. And I got to tell you, I've been in other places where history has happened. And one of the through lines I see is it's really never about the place. It's never about the place. There's nothing magical about this place. It's always about the people. It's always about people and the moment they respond to. You know, you might have heard it said that luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And maybe that's true, but I think that's what leadership is. Leadership is when preparation meets opportunity. You know, whether it's Rosa Parks or Nat King Cole or Joanne Robinson or the many hundreds of other people who were a part of the Montgomery bus boycott happening, they rose in the moment. And it was that moment and the preparation for that moment that led them to unique opportunity, that led them to a place where they became leaders. I also think there's a lesson for all of us to see and learn from the civil rights movement in particular, which is that sometimes the best leadership comes from people who've been counted out. You know, a seamstress getting off work was completely counted out. The system was created for her to do exactly what she was told, and that was to get up and move to the back of the bus. She was counted out, but she chose something different. She didn't count herself out. And because of that, she made an impact. And I think there's so many other people in this story the same way. Well, here's the thing. I know that I have felt counted out. There have been times when I've showed up in a room and maybe I didn't match the color or the background that people had in mind for the leadership that they thought this situation required. And in that time of being counted out, I've had to look to myself and say, God, you don't count me out. You've qualified me to be here. I'm called to be in the places where you have called me to lead. But maybe you're like me, though. Like sometimes I do count myself out. Sometimes it's not about what other people say. It's not about their discounting me or their doubts of me. It's really me. Do I believe that I belong? Do I believe that I have what it takes? And maybe that's you. Maybe you can relate to these stories of people who were counted out because you realize I do that to myself all the time. Maybe you count yourself out. Can I just encourage you? If you learn nothing else from all of these stories, I hope you see that the unique way that you're wired and the unique platform that you have can be used to make a dramatic impact in the world. Your God-given abilities can have a God-given impact when you use them. And I just want to encourage you in that. So if you've been discounting yourself, you've been counting yourself out. I want you to think about this woman who on December 1st in 1955 made one decision. And her one decision, along with the decisions of other people, are literally why we're here today, why there's an entire building about the place where this happened today. Now, I don't know. It may be you raising your kids. It may be a team that you lead. It may be in your neighborhood. I don't know that you're going to get a museum one day. Some of you may, maybe. But regardless, make your time on this planet count. And know that God doesn't count you out. He's giving you gifts and he wants you to use them.